Inside Ohio State Penitentiary, Ohio, America's forgotten Supermax. There are prisons built to hold men. There are prisons built to punish them. And then there are prisons built because an entire state became afraid of what could happen if certain men were ever allowed freedom of movement again. In Youngstown, Ohio, behind layers of reinforced concrete, steel doors, cameras, sensors, and silence, stands Ohio State Penitentiary. To some, it is simply another correctional institution. To others, it is one of America's forgotten Supermax prisons, a place designed not around rehabilitation, but around control. Inside these walls, routine is weaponized. Light is scheduled. Movement is rationed. Human contact is reduced to seconds at a time. Men can spend years in conditions where every sound matters and every mistake is remembered. But prisons like this do not appear by accident. They are built after fear. They are built after bloodshed. They are built when governments decide ordinary prisons are no longer enough. And what led Ohio to create this fortress begins with one of the darkest prison uprisings in modern American history. Before we go deeper, subscribe and comment where you are watching from. To understand Ohio State Penitentiary, you have to understand the crisis that came before it. During the late 20th century, many American prisons were overcrowded, understaffed, and increasingly unstable. Ohio was no exception. Facilities built for one era were now holding far more men than they were ever designed to contain. Tempers were shorter. Gangs were stronger. Staff were stretched thin. Small conflicts could ignite without warning. Then came Lucasville. In 1993, the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility became the scene of one of the longest and most deadly prison uprisings in modern United States history. For 11 days, inmates seized control of sections of the prison. Hostages were taken. Lives were lost. The state faced a nightmare scenario, armed prisoners controlling a major institution while the nation watched. When the uprising finally ended, the damage was not only physical. It shattered confidence in the prison system itself. Officials asked difficult questions. What do you do with men who organize violence behind bars? Where do you house prisoners considered too dangerous for general population? How do you contain gang leaders, repeat assailants, and inmates who attack staff or other prisoners? The answer many states embraced during that era was the Supermax prison. Ohio decided it needed one of its own. Not an old prison with a new wing. A purpose-built fortress. And when construction began, the message was clear: this would be the place for men no one else wanted to house. Ohio State Penitentiary opened in 1998 in Youngstown, a city already shaped by the rise and collapse of steel industry power. It was a fitting location in one sense, a hard place for a hard institution. From the outside, the prison appears modern and controlled. Clean lines. Heavy concrete. Layered fencing. Limited visibility. Everything designed to prevent weakness. But the true design philosophy lies inside. Older prisons often relied on bars, open tiers, and constant human presence. Supermax prisons reversed that model. They used architecture and technology to minimize contact. Doors opened remotely. Corridors were segmented. Movement happened one person at a time. Cameras watched continuously. Officers could control spaces without standing directly inside them. That was not accidental. The state wanted a prison where violence would be difficult to organize and dangerous men could be separated from everyone else. Many of the inmates sent there were considered the highest security risks in Ohio's system. Some had assaulted staff. Some were accused gang figures. Some repeatedly attacked other prisoners. Others were transferred after major disciplinary problems. To the public, OSP was often described as necessary. To critics, it was something else. They believed it represented a new kind of punishment, one less visible than chains, but just as severe. Because once the doors close in a Supermax prison, punishment often comes through time itself. For many men, life inside Ohio State Penitentiary centered around a single room. A cell built for control. Concrete walls. Narrow bed. Fixed desk or shelf. Stainless steel sink and toilet combination. Thick door with a narrow slot for meals and restraints. Limited property. Limited privacy. Limited unpredictability. To someone seeing it for the first time, the space may look clean and manageable. But a room changes when you cannot leave it freely. Hours become heavy inside a small space. The same walls begin to feel closer. The same sounds repeat: footsteps, keys, distant shouting, doors locking, ventilation systems humming. Many prisoners developed routines to preserve themselves mentally. Push-ups in sets of 50. Reading every book available, then reading them again. Walking measured steps from wall to wall. Writing letters. Memorizing case files. Watching shadows move across the floor. Some men counted days. Others stopped counting because it hurt too much. And for prisoners serving long stretches in restrictive housing, one danger appears quietly: time begins to lose shape. Morning resembles afternoon. Tuesday feels like Friday. Months can disappear into repetition. That psychological erosion is one of the least visible punishments of all. Movement inside a Supermax prison is never casual. If a man leaves his cell, it is usually because someone authorized it, documented it, and prepared for it. Doors do not simply swing open. They unlock in sequence. One barrier closes before another opens. Officers monitor positions. Inmates may be handcuffed before the door opens. Escorts depend on classification and risk level. Every step is controlled because uncontrolled movement is exactly what the prison was built to prevent. Even a medical appointment can become a security operation. Even a shower can require scheduling. Even walking 20 feet can involve multiple officers, radios, procedures, and waiting. This creates a strange reality. In ordinary life, movement feels invisible. We stand, walk, turn, sit, leave, return, barely noticing freedom of motion. Inside OSP, movement becomes rare enough to feel valuable. Some former prisoners have described hearing keys or locks and immediately wondering whether they would be leaving the cell or merely hearing someone else's turn. That is how confinement reshapes perspective. The simple act of walking down a corridor can begin to feel like an event. And what happens when basic acts become privileges? People change. Meals inside restrictive housing often arrive the same way. A slot opens. A tray slides through. The slot closes. No cafeteria noise. No table conversation. No line of men joking, arguing, trading food, or reading body language. Just one person, one tray, one room. To outsiders, it may seem minor. But shared meals are deeply human rituals. Across cultures and centuries, people gather around food. Families reconnect there. Friendships are strengthened there. Even enemies negotiate there. Remove all of that, and eating becomes mechanical. Many inmates create private rituals to fight that emptiness. Saving one item for later. Organizing food in patterns. Eating slowly to stretch time. Trading through approved channels when possible. Some lose appetite entirely. Stress can do that. Depression can do that. Isolation can do that. Others gain weight from inactivity and repetitive diets. Even hunger behaves differently in confinement. And what appears to be just another tray can become one of the few moments that divides the day into sections. Breakfast means morning still exists. Dinner means another day is ending. That matters more than many people realize. Then comes recreation. In a Supermax setting, recreation often means one inmate alone in a secured enclosure. Sometimes it is concrete with high walls. Sometimes chain link overhead. Sometimes enough room to jog in circles. Sometimes only enough room to stretch and pace. No crowd. No team sports. No free wandering. Just space that is slightly less confining than the cell. Yet for many prisoners, that hour can feel priceless. Imagine months of limited movement, then suddenly feeling wind. Imagine seeing clouds pass overhead. Imagine hearing birds. Imagine standing in rain because it is the closest thing to freedom available. Former inmates across various Supermax systems have described moments outdoors with unusual intensity because deprivation changes value. When the ordinary becomes rare, it becomes meaningful. Some used recreation to train obsessively. Some walked circles and talked to themselves. Some simply stood still and looked upward. Because after enough time indoors, even the sky can feel unfamiliar. And what happens to a person when nature itself becomes a luxury? People often assume isolation removes prison politics. It does not. It only changes the battlefield. Inside places like Ohio State Penitentiary, reputation still matters. Gang ties can still matter. Past violence still matters. Old debts still matter. Men arrive with histories that often precede them. Even when inmates are separated physically, information moves. Messages may be shouted range to range. Notes can be hidden. Rumors spread through transfers. Legal mail and court cases become conversation topics. One man's conflict in another prison can follow him into a new one. Some prisoners maintain influence without touching anyone directly. Their name alone may shape behavior. Others lose status quickly when stripped of followers and movement. And some of the most dangerous men are not loud at all. They are patient. They watch. They wait. Supermax prisons may reduce open gang activity, but they do not erase the human instincts for hierarchy, fear, alliance, and revenge. Those forces adapt. They always do. The deepest controversy around Ohio State Penitentiary, and prisons like it, has never been walls or doors. It is the mind. Supporters of Supermax confinement argue that some prisoners leave no alternative. They point to murders behind bars, organized assaults, escape plots, and repeated attacks on staff. Their view is direct: separate the most dangerous people to protect everyone else. Critics ask a different question. What does prolonged isolation do to a human being? Psychologists, attorneys, former inmates, and correctional observers have long described possible effects of extreme confinement: anxiety, panic, sleep disruption, depression, emotional numbness, rage, paranoia, hypersensitivity to noise, difficulty concentrating. Not everyone breaks the same way. Some remain disciplined and focused. Some adapt outwardly while deteriorating inwardly. Some become calmer. Some become volatile. But one fact appears repeatedly across systems: long-term isolation changes people. That creates a dilemma no easy slogan can solve. If confinement makes unstable people worse, does it create future danger? If dangerous people cannot be safely housed elsewhere, what is the alternative? Inside OSP, that question never fully disappears. It echoes through every locked door. Ohio State Penitentiary also became important far beyond Ohio because of a legal battle that reached the United States Supreme Court. The case centered on whether prisoners being assigned to OSP's severe conditions were entitled to due process protections. In simple terms, could the state place someone in these extreme restrictions without meaningful procedure? The court recognized something significant. Conditions inside a Supermax prison were so restrictive, and the consequences so serious, that placement required safeguards. That mattered because it acknowledged a truth many outside prison walls overlook: not all incarceration is equal. A sentence of years does not automatically describe how those years are lived. One inmate may serve time in a general population environment with programs, work, and social contact. Another may serve time in near-total control conditions with far less human interaction. Both are imprisoned. But the lived reality can be radically different. That legal recognition helped shape policy discussions nationwide. And it forced prison systems to confront an uncomfortable idea: housing decisions inside prison can become punishments of their own. Years pass differently inside Supermax confinement. Young men often arrive angry, muscular, impulsive, determined never to appear weak. Then decades move. Hair grays. Joints stiffen. Children become adults. Parents die. Street reputations fade. Enemies disappear into transfers, release, or graves. Yet some remain in restrictive systems built for the person they used to be. This is one of the great modern prison challenges. Criminal behavior, especially violent behavior, often declines with age. Many men become less dangerous over time. But institutions designed around worst-case scenarios can be slow to recognize change. So what do you do with a 60-year-old prisoner once labeled among the most dangerous in the state? What about chronic illness? What about dementia? What about men who committed terrible acts decades earlier but are no longer the same people physically or psychologically? These questions are becoming more urgent across America. Because prisons built for youth and violence are now managing age and decline. And Supermax logic does not always age well. Ohio State Penitentiary remains one of the clearest symbols of an era when America responded to prison violence with more control, more technology, and more isolation. It was built for reasons many considered legitimate. Real blood had been spilled. Real threats existed. Real officers feared going to work. Real inmates harmed others. Those truths should not be ignored. But another truth exists beside them. When a society builds institutions around permanent suspicion, those institutions can become difficult to rethink, even when circumstances change. OSP stands at that crossroads. Necessary to some. Excessive to others. A deterrent in one argument. A warning in another. Most people will never hear its doors lock behind them. They will never wait for a tray through a slot or measure freedom by minutes in a cage yard. But places like this still concern everyone outside the walls. Because prisons are mirrors. They reflect what a society fears. They also reflect what it is willing to do in response. And in the silence of Ohio State Penitentiary, one question still remains: when control becomes total, who is truly being changed by it, the prisoner, or the system itself? Night inside a prison like Ohio State Penitentiary carries a different kind of weight. During the day, routines provide structure. Doors open and close. Meals move. Officers rotate posts. Paperwork is processed. Announcements echo through corridors. Even confinement has rhythm. But at night, rhythm changes. The building grows quieter, though never silent. Ventilation systems hum through the walls. Distant footsteps travel farther. A door slamming several ranges away can sound like it happened next to your head. Someone shouting in another unit may be heard only as fragments. For men confined alone, night can stretch longer than daylight. There are fewer distractions. Fewer scheduled interruptions. Less evidence that time is moving. Some prisoners sleep early to escape the hours. Others stay awake because sleep is difficult under fluorescent lighting, stress, noise, or constant alertness. Some pace in the dark. Some replay old memories. Some listen carefully to every sound, learning who is walking, which officer is on duty, whether tension is building somewhere nearby. Inside restrictive prisons, many men become experts at reading atmosphere. Because danger rarely announces itself clearly. Sometimes it arrives as unusual silence. Sometimes as rapid footsteps. Sometimes as a voice raised one level higher than normal. And what begins as an ordinary night can change in seconds. Much of the public discussion around Supermax prisons focuses on inmates. Less attention is given to the people who work there. Correctional officers assigned to places like OSP enter an environment built around risk. They work among men some institutions consider the most difficult to manage. They must remain alert for manipulation, assault, contraband, mental health crises, medical emergencies, and conflicts that can escalate quickly. Unlike dramatic portrayals, most prison work is repetitive professionalism. Counting inmates accurately. Checking doors. Documenting movement. Responding to requests. Enforcing rules consistently. Maintaining calm under provocation. But repetition can hide strain. An officer may spend years being insulted, tested, lied to, threatened, or pressured for favors. Another may witness self-harm attempts, violent incidents, or severe psychological decline. Many learn not to show stress because visible weakness can be exploited by inmates or judged by peers. The emotional cost can accumulate quietly. Hypervigilance follows some officers home. Sleep problems are common across correctional professions. Relationships can suffer. Cynicism can become a defense mechanism. And in a place designed to contain tension, staff absorb tension too. Supermax prisons do not only manage inmates. They shape the lives of the people paid to guard them. Healthcare inside maximum security institutions creates another set of challenges. Even routine treatment becomes complicated when patients are high-risk inmates. A dental visit, mental health consultation, or injury examination may require escorts, restraints, staggered movement, and additional staff. That slows everything. It also raises costs. If a prisoner requires outside hospitalization, security planning intensifies further. Transportation routes, hospital coordination, guard assignments, and public safety concerns all come into play. As prison populations age, these issues become more serious. Men once housed for violent behavior may now require chronic disease treatment, mobility assistance, or psychiatric stabilization. A prison designed around physical threat must then adapt to frailty. That transition is not always smooth. Mental health care is especially controversial in restrictive housing. Some systems have increased screening and specialized units over time, recognizing that severe symptoms may worsen in isolation. Yet balancing treatment with security remains difficult. When a person is dangerous and deeply unwell at the same time, simple solutions disappear. And prisons like OSP are often where those impossible cases land. For many prisoners in long-term restrictive housing, the mind needs a mission. Without one, days can collapse inward. Some men turn to legal work. They study case law, file appeals, challenge disciplinary sanctions, and help others understand paperwork. In prison culture, someone who knows procedure can gain respect without violence. Others pursue education where available through correspondence, reading programs, or self-study. History, religion, philosophy, language learning, business books, memoirs, anything that creates movement in a place where the body cannot move freely. Some write constantly. Letters to family. Journals never mailed. Apologies never sent. Plans for a future they may never reach. Poetry. Anger. Confession. Inside confinement, writing can become proof that the self still exists. There are also men who choose discipline through physical routine. Hundreds of push-ups. Isometric exercises. Shadow boxing. Stretching in narrow spaces. A body trained inside a cage becomes its own statement, I am still here. But not everyone finds purpose. And when a man loses purpose in isolation, decline can come quietly. Missed showers. Unopened books. Untouched trays. Silence where there was once conversation through the vent. Those signs are often more serious than they look. Some of the most revealing accounts from restrictive prisons involve moments outsiders might consider insignificant. Rain. Fresh air. A tree seen in the distance. The smell of cut grass carried by wind. The sound of children somewhere beyond the perimeter. These details matter because deprivation sharpens perception. When freedom is absent, fragments of ordinary life gain emotional force. A man may remember the color of sunset for weeks. He may stand in rain simply to feel something unscheduled. He may watch birds crossing open sky and think less about birds than about direction. This is why long confinement can be difficult to explain to those who have never experienced it. The punishment is not always dramatic pain. Often it is the slow reduction of ordinary human experiences until they become rare privileges. And once that happens, the world itself begins to feel distant. Family separation is another sentence rarely listed on paper. For inmates in high-security conditions, visits can be limited, highly regulated, or emotionally difficult. Travel costs alone can prevent families from coming, especially when relatives are poor, elderly, or living far away. Children grow up through photographs. Parents age through letters. Relationships strain under years of absence, shame, anger, and bureaucracy. Some families remain fiercely loyal. They answer every call, save money for visits, write every week, refuse to let the person disappear. Others fade gradually. At first the letters come monthly. Then every few months. Then birthdays only. Then silence. Many former inmates describe silence from loved ones as one of the most painful aspects of incarceration. Violence may harden some men. Isolation may harden them further. But abandonment can break people in ways neither fist nor lock ever could. And for those serving long terms, the outside world may not wait. By the time release comes, if it comes at all, entire families can be different. Over time, many correctional systems recognized a difficult reality. If every prisoner is treated as permanently dangerous, there is little incentive for change. That led to step-down programs in various states, structured pathways allowing inmates to move gradually from the most restrictive conditions toward less restrictive housing if behavior improved. The concept sounds simple. Demonstrate compliance. Avoid violence. Engage with programming. Earn transfer. But in practice, progress can be slow and contested. Prisoners may distrust the process, believing rules can shift without warning. Staff may worry that manipulative inmates will game the system. Administrators must balance public pressure, internal safety, and legal scrutiny. Still, the idea matters. It acknowledges that prisons need exits within exits. Not only release to society, but movement away from the harshest forms of confinement. Without pathways forward, stagnation becomes policy. And stagnation breeds despair. Ohio State Penitentiary also exists inside a broader American story. The late 20th century saw rising fear of crime, harsher sentencing laws, gang anxieties, and political demand for tougher prisons. Supermax facilities emerged in multiple states during that climate. They promised order through architecture and separation. For many citizens, that promise was appealing. If violent inmates were isolated, staff might be safer. Other prisoners might be safer. The public might feel protected. Yet over time, new questions emerged. Were these prisons overused? Did they improve long-term safety? Were mentally ill inmates being warehoused rather than treated? Did years of extreme control make re-entry harder for those eventually released? Those debates continue today. OSP is not merely a building in Ohio. It is part of a national experiment whose final verdict is still unsettled. Perhaps the most striking image in modern corrections is not the violent young inmate once feared by the system. It is the aging prisoner. A man with white hair, slower steps, medication schedules, old scars, old crimes, sometimes old regrets. Across the United States, prisons now hold growing numbers of elderly inmates. Some remain dangerous. Many do not. Yet institutions built during the peak punishment era now confront a population they were never designed for. How do you run a Supermax unit for men who need walkers more than restraints? How do you justify decades of extreme confinement for someone physically diminished and unlikely to re-offend violently? How do you weigh past acts against present reality? There are no answers that satisfy everyone. Victims remember harm. Officials remember risk. Families remember humanity. And the walls remember everything. Ohio State Penitentiary was created to solve a problem. Contain the men considered most dangerous. Prevent another catastrophe. Restore control after chaos. In some respects, supporters argue it achieved that mission. But every solution creates new questions. What does years of isolation cost the human mind? What does permanent suspicion cost institutions? What does extreme punishment say about justice? These questions do not end at the prison gate. Because prisons are not separate worlds. They are extensions of public choices, public fears, and public priorities. Most people will never see the inside of OSP. They will only know it exists somewhere beyond the headlines, standing quiet in Youngstown. Yet quiet places can carry loud meanings. And behind those walls, one truth remains unchanged: the hardest prisons do not only confine bodies. They test what a society believes punishment should be. Ohio State Penitentiary was built to control the men society feared most. But behind every steel door is a larger question about punishment, power, and what happens when isolation becomes policy. If this story stayed with you, there are many more walls to cross and many more truths to uncover. Subscribe, and return for the next documentary. Until then, stay aware, stay curious, and remember, what happens behind bars often says as much about the world outside them as it does the people within.